Okay, yeah, we can get started. All right, thanks everybody for coming up. You're welcome to come closer if you want, or if you want to hide in the back, that's fine too. This hopefully will be quick, but we do have some business to go through. Just to remind folks, we did a nice job this past year and a half or so, reviewing a couple of missions, nothing that was that controversial. But then along came the new moon missions, and so I'm not sure everybody's aware, but both the Russians and the U.S. have plans for putting new retroreflectors on the moon over the next couple of years. And so we actually received a request from the Russians on this and realized that the support request form didn't have all the information that we would like to have for new retroreflectors. So we had a lively debate in that, and so I've tried to summarize here what I've captured, and I'd like to get some feedback before we actually put this into the new form and check if there's any additional information that people would like to have added. So with that, we'll jump right into the details. So for section 1 of mission information, it's not a satellite, so we'll change the terminology there. Use lunar laser ranging instead of SLR. There's a comment that what we care about is the deployment on the surface, not necessarily the launch, so we'll include some capture of that, and also make sure we capture the anticipated location on the moon, and then of course we'll request from the mission any tracking information that they can provide to narrow down better that. But within the form, we should at least have the landing site. There was a comment on changing the bin size there. There was if you remember in the support form, it lists a number of different bin sizes for normal points, which I guess did not include 600 seconds, so we could certainly add that. I'm not sure that this is something that the mission itself is going to specify. I would have thought that this is a station parameter for each lunar laser ranging station can decide their bin size, but any thoughts on that? I mean, I'm fine adding the 600 as an option, no big deal, but I don't think that's going to constrain the stations to do it. Okay, good. Moving right along. All right, so the other thing I wanted to talk about is because some of the missions have various operational procedures on them. The University of Maryland cubes that are going on some of the NASA CLIPS missions are just bolted onto the spacecraft surface, and they're going to rely on the spacecraft to land and orient in a direction that points the retro towards Earth. Good luck with that. But for that case, we're going to have to live with whatever they do. The ESA supplied retroreflector that's also going on a CLIPS mission is coming with a pointing mechanism that's going to orient it towards Earth, and the mission is going to be asking us to provide feedback to them during the 2-week period in which that they have sunlight before the whole spacecraft dies. So most of the CLIPS landers, CLIPS is the commercial lander program that NASA is running. So you're getting these very inexperienced companies that are sending landers to the moon, and most of them are not designed to last the lunar night, which gets very cold, and there's obviously no sunlight for power. So most of these landers are going to get there, they're going to last for 2 weeks while there's sunlight, and then they're going to die. So in the case of something with a pointing mechanism that needs power, you're going to have a 2-week period to find the target and provide any feedback to the mission to say, hey, I'm not getting the signal I anticipate, they can try a different position, and so on. So there's a very short turnaround time frame to be able to do this. So I think it's important that we capture those operational constraints in the form So I'll have to come up with some words for that. But I certainly welcome any suggestions for that or any other information that folks want on the concept of operations for these missions. Do we have any comments before I move on to the next section? So this is section 1, just covering the overall mission. All right, good, straightforward. Oh, we have a comment, great.
Do you think there is some other information regarding from LRO regarding this new corner cubes which can be placed?
Sorry, say again?
Sorry, there is new corner cubes which will be deposited on the moon.
Yeah, there's another section on,
Okay.
on the reflectors, yeah, for the details. This is just on the mission section.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
And for the first consideration about 600 seconds for normal points, it's the common times during which we have sufficient echo to form a normal point for a LLR. If we get under, I'm not sure the residual will be so good.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to, particularly if the mission, some of these missions may not have really accurate landing site positions. If they work well, they may have good radio ranging and be able to tell you where they landed. But like I said, some of these are pretty inexperienced folks, so if it makes it there at all. Yeah.
Yes, just a comment for the 600 seconds. In fact, only Apollo station can decrease this time.
Right.
For us, for Matera, from Wetzel or from Grass, we need to range during this time if we want a good accuracy of the normal points. But
yeah.
that's all.
Yeah, no, understood. So my point was that's really a station decision. We don't need the mission to tell us what normal point size they want. Right? They don't have a choice. Right? They're gonna live with whatever we can give them. Yeah. Okay. For the tracking restrictions, we don't anticipate any of these missions to have tracking restrictions, but I think as the comments that we'd had over email was there's no harm in having it there, and they can just say not applicable. So I didn't receive any changes, suggested change to that section. So unless there's any comments now, we can skip right over that section. Okay, now for the fun one. For the retroreflector array information. It was funny when I looked at the form, and I guess Jean-Pierre had commented on this, that the current form doesn't have the actual array size and number of reflectors. The information would be buried in there because they have to provide a picture and one can go count, but that was a good catch. So I think we should add that both to a lunar form and to the regular one, because it's nice to just look at a form and say, oh, there's 48 cubes or whatever it is. But all the cubes that I'm aware of, I don't know what the Russians are doing, but the ones that are going up now are single cubes, single large cubes. So the answer will be 1 for that. Okay, so there's a section that describes about the spacecraft body, for normal SLR, talks about where it is on the body, and so we can, figure out where it is relative to the Saramasa spacecraft and all that kind of good stuff. I think it would be useful for us to have some sense of that as well for a lander, because most of these are going to be sitting on top somewhere, and it'd be nice to capture here some idea of where it is on the lander. Is it out on an arm like the Luna ones, or is it just mounted to the surface, and what are the legs of the lander? So probably we'll make this fairly general just so that they can provide as much description as possible about the lander, assuming it is staying on the lander, not being deployed. I was just wondering if folks had any comments or thoughts on any specific questions we should be asking about its position on the lander, characteristics of the lander.
Would would it not be I don't know, would it be something we'd expect to picture? You know, like all the satellite ones come with I don't know, 3 or 4 faces of the picture with the array on. If I imagine if I was putting a lander up, I'd put a picture of the lander in with X marks the spot with the reflector on.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I would want to know where it is on the lander and then some sense of the characteristics of the legs, because this thing sitting on the lander is going to go up and down from the thermal expansion. And that's something I think the analysts are going to want to know, because as we're observing from day to night, if this thing is going up by a millimeter or so, because these things aren't made out of low CTE material, I'm sure. That's something we'd want to.
So we need a definite scaled drawing, not just a cartoon.
Yeah, I think we need something a little bit more than a cartoon. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments on spacecraft lander characteristics? Okay. Right, 1064, I think no problem. We can add that to get the refractive index of the cube. Pointing accuracy. It would be good to understand how hard it's going to be. If it's pointed by the lander, what is the requirements on the lander to point it? If it's got a pointing mechanism, what are the requirements there? Just so that we know, we're prepared for how challenging, because if it's arbitrarily pointed, we may have trouble. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
And the optical cross-section is already in the, also asked for the mission, or?
Sorry, I'm having a hard
The
time.
optical cross-section of the satellite, both in green and in infrared. You know,
Yeah, does the form actually have the, sorry, I'll use the mic. I can't remember whether the form explicitly asks for the cross-section. I think it has some, you could derive it from it, but it may not explicitly ask that.
I don't think so. I don't recall seeing that anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, we can. I'll make sure. Just capture this here. Oh. I'm sorry. Claudia, are you in the room? Can you take notes, please? Just say that we to double check that we capture the optical cross section. So related to that, though, I put a comment here about the polarization dependencies. They're having a heck of a time, because we've measured the University of Maryland cube, and it's got, some weird, dealing with the velocity aberrations, because at the moon it's asymmetrical. And for these large cubes, they have to spoil them slightly in order to push the velocity aberrations into the right thing. But it's polarization dependent with these. And so there's going to be some desire and maybe you've already talked with Doug about this, but there's some desire to have the stations be able to rotate their polarization to optimize the returns so that they're compensating for the velocity aberration and how the cube is built. So the question is, what do we want to ask about that here? I mean, ideally, if they produce a far field diffraction pattern in, the two linear and circular polarizations, they can do that. Not everybody's going to be able to do that, I think, but if we had that, that would probably be great. We can certainly, since we've measured that for Doug, we can probably produce that. I'm not sure what the Italians have done.
Are we allowed to put sort of, I suppose we can do what we like, we're allowed to do anything, but you know what I mean? We can put, you can put something voluntary or optional in, so a sort of hint that that would be a good idea if you can do it, but not essential if you can't. Is that?
Yeah, well, I think everything on the form,
It's sort of under that
yeah,
category.
not all the missions have or understand what to put, but yeah, we should ask for as much as we want and we'll get what we get.
Yeah.
So, my question is really, is there a way of expressing this that folks have that would be most useful?
Yes, it's very important to have this information when we don't understand the linked budget or whatever. So more information we have, better it is.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, Graham.
Is it unreasonable for the missions to specify or do some link budget checks themselves? I mean, for these kind of very difficult ones, they must
For the link budget, you said?
They must have gone through. The missions themselves must have worked out what they might expect to get back for a given different. And there's only a few laser ranging stations that can reach these targets, so they will have worked some budget before launching the thing, surely.
Yeah, most of them think of it in terms of relative to the Apollo arrays, right? How strong is it compared to a pristine Apollo array? And then saying, well, even though we're smaller, we're not full of dust. So we'll be better, but yeah, that's I don't know that they've worked out, because that's going to be station dependent, the link budget. But
Oh, sure, but
yeah.
as I say, there's only a finite number of stations that will be in the game. So it would be reasonable to have the mission come up with some assessment of what the link budget should be, I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, at a minimum, as we're talking, to have a far-field diffraction pattern where you know the cross-section as a function of both polarization, and velocity aberration, so that you have some sense of how the reflector is going to respond over the course of the orbit.
Just more information the better, I thought,
Yeah,
to be put on that form.
right. Okay. Good. Are we having anybody online have any comments? I haven't been looking so far. No. Okay. I think if folks are online and they unmute themselves, they'll probably be heard. But if you're not being heard, then you can just put something in the chat. Okay. All right. So next is sort of other comments that I received. There was a comment that we provide some feedback to the mission that they land when conditions at the moon are optimal. I think this is a interesting question in that we might define what we consider to be optimal. However, the missions are not going to change their landing time, because particularly for these CLIPS missions, all they're doing is they're trying to hit at the beginning of a lunar day so that they have the maximum amount of time. So if you need nighttime to hit it, forget, you won't be able to do it at the beginning, because it'll be in sunlight for 2 weeks. You got to be able to range to it during the day, lunar day. And picking which time of the month is also not going to be. So elevation angle and things like that, you're going to kind of have to live with it. But if you do have, I forget who gave this comment, but if you do have operational constraints, it might be good to just write those down so that we can make those available to the mission so that they can consider that at least within, yeah.
Another point, can we also have some information about the thermal dependence? For example, it's the corner cube or the array is able to work during daylight, during the day, when the array is lighted by the sun. For example, like for the Lino code.
So for thermal, I know at least the University of Maryland cube and the ESA cube, they've spent a lot of time putting a thermal shield, and it's, you know, it's the normal supercell glass, total internal reflection. So they should have pretty decent thermal performance. It is a large cube, so if they do end up getting a large gradient across it, you might see it, but it's a pretty high quality glass. So I don't know about the Russian one, what they're thinking. Yeah. But, you know, unless you're in that period where you're trying to give them feedback on pointing, then you'll just wait until conditions are right for the station. Yeah, so this timing question is really only relevant for that initial period. Yeah, so if you do have some constraints that you would like to pass in the mission, just let me know and we'll do that. Okay. Other question I had was whether we would like to have two separate forms, one for LLR and one for SLR, or whether we can just combine it. I mean, it might confuse one group versus the other, or it might just make it easier to grab one form and have NA for things. Anybody have any particular thoughts or care? Yeah, Claudia, what would make your life easier?
I don't know if it might work, but you can have the form as is with the changes you wanted for the regular form and have an appendix after it, like the next page with the additional information you need for lunar missions. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we could add a section that's
Right.
lunar only, or just flag things, lunar missions here.
So what would your Pathfinder mission be? Is that a lunar mission or a satellite? Because it's both.
I think that's an SLR mission, right? I mean, it's SLR like anything else.
Yeah.
It's just a different orbit.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I don't have a strong feeling about whether it should be two separate forms. I don't think it really matters. But I would say I would have thought it's not beyond people to pick from two appropriately if it was easy, if it made both forms shorter and simpler to do two separate. I don't think we should worry that people are going to pick the wrong one. I mean, they can just choose the other one next time. You know? Yeah, yeah. Well, when they first arrive, you know, when the mission first proposes, you know, we can send them the right one straight away, or direct them to download the right one. Yeah. Yeah.
Here, use the mic because the people online can't hear.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just saying that we can always pick the right one if we know the kind of mission it is and send it to them individually, contacting the mission contacts. But we also have them posted on the web for them to go directly and download them if they want, and there are instructions that go with it. So we will have to make sure that those are clear as well.
Yeah. Rob, behind you.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe throwing another stone in the water, I don't know. Is there anything happening in the foreseeable future about, for instance, being asked to track Lagrange point orbits or something like that? So you'd like to make it very general. I'm just asking, no idea.
That sounds a lot like the case of a satellite in a different orbit to me.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because when I think about thinking about Lunar Pathfinder, what additional information people would need, I can't think of anything that's not on the form, right? You still need things attached to the body relative to the body coordinates, right? The same kind of stuff, it's just the different orbit. Whereas on the surface, it's a little bit different. And maybe some of the information we were asking for here would actually be useful for satellites. I mean, if everybody gave us a far field diffraction pattern, wouldn't that be wonderful, right? So there's no reason that we only need that for lunar. We just haven't bothered to ask for it because up until recently there hasn't been a lot of capabilities to produce that.
Yeah, I think for the reflector area, the information should be the same, basically. The only real difference is the orbit. So is it an Earth orbit, it's a Lagrange point, what orbital altitude, or the geographical position for the lunar. So this is the real difference, I think. So the rest we can have a common base.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is there's no opposition to adding the additional information here for satellites. It may, we'll certainly be understanding that they won't necessarily have characterized their arrays as well as we would expect lunar missions to. But if they have, then that's great. And then we can just tailor the wording of some of the other sections, whether it's lander, or whether it's orbit, or landing site kind of stuff. That might be the easiest thing. I don't know. As those on the committee know, we get these forms from missions, and some of the missions are confused to begin with. And so I just don't want to make some university CubeSat vendor any more confused than they already are. Okay, all right. That kind of dovetails into the next question, which was for lunar orbiters, is there anything we need? Now, as I was describing for Lunar Pathfinder, the concept of operations is to point the spacecraft towards Earth for 5 days once a month. That's the kind of information we need to be able to capture on the form. So it's not just the orbit, but there's also operational information. This is perhaps similar to what's in the restricted tracking type section. It's not a restriction, it's just an operational constraint. So I think at a minimum we need to figure out how to have a section on concept of operations, which I think is most applicable probably to the lunar orbiters, but for other missions, if they have something, they could add it there. Visibility, if you know the orbit, you can certainly compute that yourself, but like with Lunar Pathfinder, they're going to be pointing it towards Earth on specific times, but there's going to be like 1 hour periods every once in a while where the spacecraft just happens to be oriented in the right direction. And if you're lucky, you could try to target it at that time. That's something that you may not know going in unless the mission tells you, unless they've done the orbit analysis. So that might be the kind of information we'd like to kind of tease out of them. Because when I talked to SSTL, they didn't volunteer that information. It wasn't until I asked, is this really the only time? And then they said, oh, well, actually, you could. So unless they're asked, they're not going to tell us. Is there anything else anybody can think of? Yeah.
I just want to clarify something that I thought I heard and saw up there. Did you say, are we saying that the array size and the number of cubes was not on the form?
I couldn't find it.
Because I filled out a mission support request form for ISAT 2 for Scott Luthke, and I definitely had to put the number of cubes
Yeah.
and the
Okay.
array size and the size of the cubes and all that stuff. So I went back to check. It's definitely there. So I'm not sure what form I filled out, but it was definitely
Well, they redid the form.
okay.
Yeah,
So maybe-
I could have missed it, but when I went searching
Okay.
for it, I was like, where is this?
This was 2016, so maybe something got lost in the.
It could be it got shuffled.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely important.
You couldn't find it either? Yeah, okay. All right. Any other comments before we move on? Oh, yeah, over here. Still no comments online?
No, for me, the question is, if we have these time windows where only ranging is possible, how we can make it easy for the station to get the timing right. So if we just provide CPFs only for the specific time frames, or we can reuse something like the go no-go file format to the specific, so that the mission has also some flexibility. So we should think about that. So maybe the go no-go file format can be used for that.
Yeah, the question is whether you want that kind of infrastructure. I mean, they could certainly only provide predictions for the periods where it's visible, right? So if you don't see predictions for that period, you know it's not visible. Or there could just be an auxiliary thing to tell you, and you have predictions for the whole time. I don't know what's most useful to folks.
Yeah, but with the predictions, usually we have, so we begin a file at midnight and have 5 days or so. So if the reorientation of the satellite is in between, so then we have maybe a timing problem. So when will the satellite precisely be oriented correctly?
Oh, you mean for the arbitrary periods where they just happen to be?
Yeah, or so if there's some mission dependency, so when the satellite looks correctly.
Yeah, so, well, like for Lunar Pathfinder, that 5-day period is part of their operations, and it's an experimental period the mission has agreed to do. The other periods, they're not going to stop us from ranging, but it's not part of their operations.
No, so what I have in mind that we should avoid that the station is starting to range because it assumes the orientation of the satellite is correct, but for some reason it's not.
Oh, you're saying that they provide feedback whether they've actually done the maneuver?
Yeah, for that, the go no-go flag might be suitable. So because it's something the mission has to do, and if it not happen or there was a delay or whatever, then you may start to range and you don't get anything and you don't know why.
Right, so we don't waste our time.
So that's the direction I'm thinking.
We've had this situation before.
Yep, go ahead, Randy.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had this situation before, even with LRO. The stations were told to range from this time to this time because an hour later they'd be tracking when the LRO was on the backside of the moon. So we need to go back. I don't have the notes at my fingertips, but there are a number of satellites that had situations like this. Radio Astron is another one, I think. So just go back and find out what our mechanisms were during those times and apply those as appropriate to these missions. In fact, I think there is some tracking restriction information on at least the mission request form at one stage of its existence.
Yeah, I can certainly raise this with the mission. Is there something on the form that we would maybe encourage that?
You do have a section on the form that asks for mission details
Uh-huh.
and tracking restrictions. So scrolling through it, and I don't know if you want me to email it to you, and you can look at it there while I'm doing this.
But I think, yeah, I mean, it could go there. The mission may skip that section since they won't consider it tracking, so we have
No,
to.
there is a specific mission specifics, scientific and engineering objectives to begin with. That could be a short description like in some. But the other one, role of the satellites arranging, launch date and all that, anticipated orbital parameters, tracking requirements. Then you have other comments on mission information. And of course, you have the tracking restrictions, which is all of section 2. And you can ask for much more detail in there, I suppose. There's several subsections in there. And then other comments on tracking restrictions. And then about whenever you're ready to hear about retroreflectors and array information in this form, is all of section 3. And there are several subsections there, like you're asking for the retroreflector primary contact information in addition to the array type, with diagrams and photographs of the LRA. At the end of the document, the manufacturer, the link for reference, LRA design, and any type of cubes being used previously, satellite body fixed XYZ coordinates, satellite body fixed XYZ coordinates with respect to the celestial terrestrial solar reference frame, and added to control policy, 3D location of the mass center. Okay, you go on and on. And then you have attachments that you can put at the end of the document, corner cube, recessing container or not, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So there's a lot. And other comments on LRA at the end, and a lot of the forms do have a lot of pictures about the retroreflectors details, so.
Right, but I think the point was, out of all that detail, we never asked how many cubes.
So some of them had a picture and caption that stated how many cubes.
Yeah,
And some of the missions and the information we have online, we can make that a requirement, of course.
yeah, no, it was just a comment. We'll add it.
Okay.
We'll make sure it's there. So getting back to your comment, I think it would be a good idea to add something under operations that would encourage them or force them to think about how they're going to notify, whether it's with a go, no-go flag or some other means, that there's an issue. So have to think about how to put that in. Yeah, but that's with restricted tracking. So this is just a case of don't waste your time tracking.
Yes, I don't think we need too much information to decide if this mission is accepted or not by ILRS. We need information, general information on the mission to know if it's possible. We need also the scientific goals of this mission, the technical goals also for this mission. But after we will see what the mission need, if they need no-go, something like that, like for allow. But at that time, we don't need all this information. We just decide, yes, this mission is interesting for ILRS to support or not. And the position, the number of corner cubes, something like that, seems enough. It's not, I think it's difficult for people to receive a full MSRF, and very complicated to fill it. And for us, it's just necessary to know, yes, it's a mission for ILRS or not, or something like that. After, we will adapt our station, or we will do what we can. But it's
Right.
my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's true. There's a balance between what we ask for on the form and the interaction that is inevitable that needs to happen.
What actually happens normally is you tease out in the process of getting the correct form filled in that there's some sort of tracking restriction. There's some, from the point of view of it not being available for half an orbit or only available above 50 degrees or not available above 60 or whatever it is. And then the conversation starts about how they're going to inform that. Then you start the conversation about no-go flags or go flags and all that stuff.
Right.
So as long as we as long as it's clear enough that something that stops it being available 100% of the time needs to be mentioned, the conversation about how we go about mitigating that doesn't have to be on there, because it's kind of something they work out with us.
Right. Fair enough. All right. Oh, Toshi?
It was Kerry Noll and myself who actually made a revision of the missions, missions support request form last time, and we also had a similar discussion. Should we have a maximum information or minimum information into the and probably we took some compromise.
Yeah.
And just for the record, there is there should be information about the number of reflectors, because we asked the position of each reflector, which means the lines of the XYZ should be the number. So it is not clear.
It's implicit, not explicit. Yeah.
So you can read it. Anyway.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right, any other? Oh, yeah, we should make it person agnostic. It should just say the secretary or whatever. Okay, there's not a secretary exploder? Oh, there should be, that way. All right, we'll talk about that. Yeah. Okay, any other comments on that? All right, last thing I just wanted to mention, because I don't know that we need to address this now, but there was a comment on the email about addressing transponders and one-way ranging. I think that's a whole nother discussion that we need to have when we're ready for that, if the request form needs to do. But I did want to just bring it up here and see if folks had any comments they wanted to raise at this point about at some point modifying the request form for these other types of things. Yeah.
They're so unusual and so one-off.
Yeah.
That the whole concept of a random person filling in a form is crazy. There's so much work involved in sorting out a mission like that I just think it's a different thing.
Yeah, I agree. Unless we start getting flooded with transponder requests, yeah, we can just deal with it on a case by case. We don't need a standardized form for it. That's a good point. Okay. All right. That was. Let me ask one more time if anybody else online had any comments they wanted to make. Seems like not. Okay. All right. Well, unless there's any other, is there any other business that people want to bring up to the Mission Standing Committee? All right. Having heard none, meeting closed. Thank you, everybody.